Hey everyone! Before we get started, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I will love to see how far this community reaches, and while you are at it, don't forget to subscribe. Alright, let's jump into today's video. The case of Rachel Madden's. The case of Rachel Madden's disappearance became one of the most talked about stories in the media. A young and accomplished dentist, well respected within her community and adored by her patients, vanished without a trace from her upscale home in Brentwood. What remained behind was her 2-year-old daughter, left alone in an empty house and disturbing signs of a struggle. Details that raise more questions than they answer, shrouded in an air of fear and mystery. What really happened behind closed doors in this seemingly perfect home? How did someone who lived in luxury and appeared successful by all measures end up in such a perilous situation? Rachel Madden's family and early life. Rachel Liliana Madden's, Nate Tucker, was born on March 19, 1979 in Nashville, Tennessee, the state's vibrant capital and largest city. She was the youngest of 2 children in a prominent and well-off family of healthcare professionals. Her father, Richard, was a distinguished and respected pharmacist, while her mother, Bethany, ran a private pediatric practice. Rachel was raised alongside her older brother, with whom she shared a close and affectionate bond. Their parents were devoted, providing both children with excellent education and ample opportunities to develop their talents. Rachel attended a prestigious Catholic all-girls private school, where she quickly established herself as one of the top performers in her class. After graduating high school, she gained admission to a respected college in Birmingham, Alabama, and later secured a scholarship to attend a well-known state medical university. While at university, Rachel discovered a strong passion for tennis, excelling in the sport and earning awards. Her career path became clearer as she chose to specialize in dentistry. She attended a private dental school in Florida, graduating with honors in February 2005. Her outstanding qualifications earned her a residency at the Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C. During this period, Rachel published academic papers in medical journals and took part in both national and international conferences, establishing herself as a promising young professional. The family's tragic turn. However, a dark shadow fell over Rachel's life in February 2004 while she was still a student. Her father, the well-known pharmacist, was accused of forging prescriptions and illegally distributing controlled substances. Richard was arrested at work and taken into custody where he was held until trial. Tragically, he passed away from a heart attack in his jail cell, unable to cope with the stress and humiliation of the accusations. The Madden's family's troubles did not end there. Rachel, along with her mother and brother, found themselves under investigation. Their financial accounts were frozen, and they were restricted from traveling outside the country until the inquiry was concluded. The investigation stretched on for over a year. 2 of Richard's colleagues were eventually arrested, and Richard himself was posthumously exonerated with formal apologies extended to the family. The emotional aftermath of her father's tragic passing, the drawn-out investigation, and the stain of public scandal had a profound impact on Rachel Madden's mental and emotional well-being. She fell into a prolonged depression, appearing overwhelmed and broken. Despite this dark period, a few years later, Rachel managed to reclaim her life. She opened a private dental practice in Brentwood, a peaceful and affluent suburb of her hometown of Nashville, located in Williamson County, Tennessee. Her career took off at an impressive pace. Rachel became known as a highly skilled and innovative orthodontist, attracting clients from neighboring cities and even from other states. Her dental clinic quickly gained a reputation as one of the most advanced and well-equipped facilities in all of Tennessee, admired for its cutting-edge technology and top-notch service. A marriage marked by wealth and success. From a young age, Rachel was known for her striking beauty, drawing attention from many admirers. Tall, athletic, and graceful, with long blonde hair and a dazzling smile, she effortlessly turned heads. Yet despite the interest she received, Rachel remained focused on her studies and career ambitions, putting off serious relationships and family plans until she was firmly established professionally. In the late 2000s, Rachel met a man named Reynold Maidens. Reynold was nearly 8 years her senior, but the age gap never became an obstacle for their connection. Born and raised in a modest town in Georgia, Reynolds came from a middle-class background. He attended a local high school before enrolling in a technical college and later went on to study at Clark University in Atlanta. After earning his degree, Reynolds landed a job as a sales manager at a major pharmaceutical company. His career rapidly progressed, and in February 2007, he was transferred to the company's Nashville branch, where he assumed a senior management role. By the time Rachel and Reynolds crossed paths, both were well established in their careers. They earned impressive salaries, lived comfortably, and were free to indulge in the luxuries that success afforded them. Reynolds was charming and intelligent, a well-read man who could engage in conversations on a wide range of topics. His polished demeanor and friendly disposition made him appealing to nearly everyone he met. He first encountered Rachel at a gathering hosted by mutual friends, and he was instantly captivated by the sophisticated blonde with impeccable style. Rachel was equally taken with Reynolds, and their romantic relationship blossomed rapidly. By February 2009, Reynolds proposed, and Rachel joyfully accepted his heartfelt offer. After their lavish wedding, the newlyweds, with the support of Rachel's family, purchased a stunning mansion situated in Brentwood's most exclusive neighborhood. The home had everything they needed for a comfortable and secure lifestyle. The surrounding area was filled with charming parks, pristine golf courses, and high-end bars and restaurants frequented by the affluent community. Just 15 minutes away by car was a bustling business district, home to the headquarters of several major corporations. Reynolds' office was located in one of those corporate buildings, while Rachel's private clinic stood nearby in a separate state-of-the-art facility. Their luxurious home was nestled within the grounds of a prestigious private club, and the neighborhood itself was known as one of the safest and most areas in the state. In late 2010, the couple welcomed their daughter Natalie. Their happiness appeared complete and limitless. Rachel, a devoted yet ambitious mother, didn't stay away from her career for long. Despite her short maternity leave, she continued to oversee the operations of her clinic and returned to work full-time less than a year later. By mid-2012, Reynolds' behavior started to take a turn. He began drinking heavily, claiming it was the only way to unwind from the pressures of his demanding job. Rachel's efforts to have meaningful conversations with him about his growing alcohol use led nowhere. Reynolds stubbornly denied that he had a drinking problem, insisting he could quit anytime he wanted. As the months went by, Rachel became increasingly worried. Rachel suspected that Reynolds' problems extended beyond alcohol and that he might be using more harmful substances. His moods became increasingly erratic with sudden bouts of irrational aggression. His behavior grew unpredictable and at times genuinely frightening. Attempts to address the issue often ended in explosive arguments or outright denial, leaving Rachel feeling powerless and deeply worried. These negative changes in Reynolds' conduct soon began to impact his professional life. His job performance plummeted, and after multiple warnings from his supervisors, he ultimately lost his position. However, this serious setback did not lead to any self-reflection or efforts to improve. Instead, Reynolds' drinking worsened, and he was often so intoxicated that he was barely coherent or aware of his surroundings. Roughly 3 months before the event that changed everything, Rachel confided in her mother about a disturbing discovery. Reynolds had been secretly withdrawing large sums from their joint bank account and transferring the money into his personal account. Rachel's investigation into these transactions revealed that the transfers began shortly after she had threatened to divorce him during one of their heated arguments, warning him that he would be left with nothing. It seemed clear that Reynolds, possibly fearing that she might follow through, was taking measures to secure some of their shared finances for himself. The incident at the restaurant. In January 2013, Reynolds showed up at a Brentwood restaurant in an extremely agitated and unsteady state, clearly under the influence of some kind of prohibited substances. His behavior was erratic and confrontational. He harassed other patrons and seemed to be spoiling for a fight. Alarmed, the restaurant manager called the emergency services, reporting the escalating disturbance. Only minutes later, she made a follow-up call, explaining that when staff tried to escort Reynolds out of the building, several high-caliber bullets fell out of his coat pocket along with a small container of unidentified pills. When law enforcement arrived, they spoke to Reynolds, but surprisingly let him off with just a verbal warning. On the back seat of his car, officers spotted a shotgun, which Reynald had a permit for. But he couldn't give a coherent explanation as to why he had brought the firearm with him to the restaurant that night. As Reynald attempted to get behind the wheel and drive away, the officers intervened, preventing him from doing so in his intoxicated state. They suggested calling his wife Rachel to come pick him up. In response, Reynolds' demeanor shifted dramatically. He became desperate and begged them not to contact her. His behavior resembled that of a frightened child fearing punishment. He repeatedly pleaded, insisting that Rachel would be furious if she found out, and promised that nothing like this would ever happen again. Who actually came to get Reynolds that night remains unclear. He made a phone call to someone, and roughly 15 minutes later, a car pulled up to the restaurant. Reynolds quickly got in and left. None of the witnesses got a good look at the driver, but some accounts suggest that it may have been a former colleague of his. On the evening of April 21, 2013, the Brentwood Police Department received a distressing call from a concerned woman who was unable to get in touch with her daughter all day and was growing increasingly worried about her daughter's safety, as well as that of her young granddaughter. The caller was Bethany, Rachel's mother. She knew all too well about her son-in-law, Reynolds' struggles with alcohol and dangerous substances, and how his behavior became unpredictable and reckless under their influence. Bethany pleaded with the police to urgently send officers to her daughter's home to check on the situation. She shared that Reynald had been on the brink of a breakdown, often making alarming threats, including harming himself or lashing out at Rachel. Bethany also mentioned that her granddaughter, Natalie, who was only 2.5 years old, was likely in the house. The police responded swiftly and arrived at the residence, but no one answered when they knocked on the front door. The curtains on the ground floor were tightly drawn, making it impossible to see inside. However, the unmistakable sound of a child crying loudly could be heard from within the house, raising serious concerns for the child's safety. Officers decided to force entry through the garage door to get inside. Once inside, their calls went unanswered. Following the sound of the distressed child, they made their way deeper into the house. There, in a hallway, they found Natalie, sitting on the floor and sobbing for her mother. At her young age, she couldn't explain what had happened, but the fear and confusion in her eyes were evident. As the officers moved down the hallway, they noticed blood splattered on one of the walls. They followed the grim trail, which led to a horrifying scene in the living room. Rachel, age 34, was found lifeless on the floor, and a shotgun lay discarded on the nearby couch. An investigation later revealed that she had suffered 9 gunshot wounds, in addition to 2 blasts of buckshot fired into her back. There was no chance for Rachel to survive the brutal attack. The hallway, entryway, living room, and even the bedroom door were covered in blood. It was clear that the violent act had unfolded throughout these areas, with Rachel being pursued and attacked as if she were a target in a shooting range. After the assault, the perpetrator had wrapped her body in a blanket and attempted to clean up the bloodstains from the floors and walls. However, there was far too much blood and the effort was quickly abandoned. The suspect then fled the scene. The prime and only suspect in this crime was Reynald, who was immediately declared a wanted fugitive. Thankfully, the child, though traumatized, was physically unharmed, but the emotional impact was obvious. It appeared that she had witnessed the entire ordeal, a terrifying experience for someone so young. Bethany, devastated and in shock upon hearing the news, rushed to her daughter's home to take her granddaughter into her care. The high-end country club where the crime took place was swarming with law enforcement. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing residents in hopes that someone had witnessed something or could offer leads on the suspect's whereabouts. The search for Reynolds was extensive, including aerial support with helicopters, as authorities deemed him highly dangerous due to his unstable behavior. His photo was shown on the evening news alongside a public appeal for tips about his location. The community was also warned that he might still be armed. During a thorough search of the home, investigators discovered a note. More precisely, a lengthy letter written by the suspect. In the letter, Reynolds apologized to his young daughter, though he never clearly stated what he had done. He also expressed gratitude to his mother-in-law and Rachel's other relatives, thanking them for their kindness and support over the years. years. He spoke about his love and appreciation for them, but then launched into a bitter rant accusing his wife of making his life unbearable. He claimed she had belittled and pressured him, and that things worsened after he lost his job, pushing him to a breaking point he said he could no longer tolerate. Throughout the letter, Reynolds blamed Rachel, portraying her as domineering from the beginning of their relationship and accusing her of systematically breaking him down and controlling him. He justified his addiction to hard liquor and powerful substances as his only way to cope with the pressure. He insisted that his substance abuse and job loss were consequences of being trapped in a marriage with what he described as a tyrannical partner. His writing was erratic, at times disjointed, and he frequently repeated himself, but the overall message was a clear and desperate attempt to deflect responsibility. The letter also contained a request that custody of his daughter be granted to his mother-in-law, who he believed would be a loving and capable guardian. For investigators, the letter was essentially a confession, leaving no doubt about who had committed the crime. However, forensic experts speculated that the message could be a final farewell, raising concerns that the suspect might have harmed himself after fleeing the scene. Despite this possibility, the search efforts pressed on as Reynolds was still considered a significant threat to the public. In the trunk of Reynolds Maiden's car, which had been abandoned near the house, officers found a duffel bag containing nearly $100,000 in cash. It was clear that he had planned to escape with the money, but for reasons unknown, left it behind. Detectives also discovered that on the night before the tragic incident, Reynolds had made a lengthy phone call to his attorney, though the content of that conversation remained undisclosed. The very next day, as police continued their extensive search for Reynolds Maidens, he unexpectedly emerged from hiding, approaching the officers with his hands up and expressing his willingness to cooperate with the investigation. Without resistance, he allowed himself to be handcuffed and was escorted to the station for questioning. Right away, Reynolds began blaming the victim for all his misfortunes, claiming that she had subjected him to years of psychological torment and constant humiliation. He wept openly, describing how he had gone from being a successful corporate executive to an unemployed alcoholic who had become a local laughingstock. He recounted wandering the streets aimlessly, too terrified to return home to face his wife. It turned out that for the past 6 months, neighbors had filed multiple complaints about Reynolds' erratic and disturbing behavior. He had been known to approach strangers on the streets aggressively, trying to start conflicts. He had also been cited several times for driving under the influence, yet curiously, his driver's license had not been suspended, which many found puzzling. In March 2013, a heavily intoxicated Reynolds crashed his car into a transformer station, leaving an entire neighborhood without power. Just a week before the tragic incident, neighbors reported seeing him walking around his property with a shotgun. On April 15th, for example, he approached a neighboring home with the weapon, terrifying the children playing on the lawn and their parents, who promptly called the police. Reynolds was arrested, but released the next day without any charges, likely due to bailing his way out of the situation. Former colleagues of Reynolds reported that his behavior had started to change dramatically about 6 months prior to the incident. He often blamed his erratic conduct on family issues and repeatedly complained about his wife, though no one believed that Rachel, described as refined and kind, could have been the tyrant he made her out to be. Just before the new year, Reynolds caused a scene at a high-end restaurant in a 5-star hotel where he and his wife were dining. After getting severely drunk at the bar, he erupted in a violent outburst when Rachel tried to take him home, hurling glasses and bottles against the walls and shouting threats to harm her. Although the incident was hushed up at the time, word quickly spread to his employer's management, and Reynolds was terminated from his job. This was not the first time his behavior had raised red flags at work. During the trial, his former employer admitted that Reynolds' dependency on controlled substances had been an open secret for some time. The company had offered him support and treatment options, but he had refused all help. In the investigation, it was uncovered that Reynolds had been in frequent contact with an old flame, Larissa Farley, over the past several months. It seemed he had developed strong feelings for her once again, and there were indications that he had been planning to run away with her. Authorities suspected that he had been withdrawing money from his joint account with Rachel to fund a new life with Larissa somewhere far away. However, There was no evidence to suggest that Larissa had any knowledge of or involvement in the crime against Rachel. Detectives quickly tracked down Larissa and brought her in for questioning. She appeared genuinely shocked when she learned of what her lover had done. Larissa insisted that Reynold had always been a kind and thoughtful man, claiming he must have acted out of extreme desperation. She reiterated that Reynold often complained about the pressure and emotional strain his wife placed on him, implying that Rachel might have driven him to his breaking point, charges, and a controversial legal ruling. Reynold was charged with a premeditated crime against his wife and with endangering the life of his young daughter, who was in the home at the time. Additionally, he faced accusations of tampering with evidence as he had attempted to clean up blood stains. Investigators also suspected that Reynolds had wrapped Rachel's body in a blanket, possibly intending to dispose of it, but may have abandoned the plan due to either a lack of physical strength or fear of being spotted by neighbors. He was taken into custody with bail set at a staggering $2,000,000. Reynolds maintained his innocence, claiming that Rachel had provoked him. By June 2013, his lawyer successfully petitioned to reduce the bail to $700,000, which Reynolds posted using funds from the joint account he shared with Rachel. Rachel's mother, Bethany, fought hard to prevent this, but Reynolds' skilled defense attorney secured access to those funds. Despite the gravity of the charges, the 42-year-old was released on house arrest, confined to the very mansion where he allegedly committed the crime. Later, his restrictions were eased further, replacing house arrest with travel limitations that allowed him to move freely around town while awaiting trial. The trial date was scheduled for September 2014, nearly a year and a half later. Bethany's repeated attempts to contest this leniency were dismissed. The only real restriction Reynolds faced during this time was wearing an ankle monitor to track his whereabouts. Additionally, a court order barred him from contacting his daughter or any of Rachel's family members, either directly or indirectly. About 6 months later, Bethany finally succeeded in getting a court order that barred Reynold from using the assets he had accumulated with her late daughter and revoked his right to live in the mansion. However, this didn't stop Reynold from brazenly returning to the house and taking whatever he deemed valuable, including high-priced possessions. His audacity outraged everyone, and contempt of court charges were filed against him. Yet, his defense attorney managed to have these charges dismissed, once again maneuvering Reynold out of trouble. Reynold seemed to slip through the cracks of the legal system repeatedly, using the funds he had effectively stolen from Rachel's personal and shared accounts to cover his mounting legal expenses. Despite Bethany and her family's efforts to recover or freeze the stolen money, they were unsuccessful. Reynold often appeared in court with a smug grin, reveling in the sense that he was untouchable. A dangerous individual responsible for a brutal crime committed in front of a young child was allowed to remain free. Witnesses repeatedly highlighted Reynold's history of substance abuse, noting how he became erratic, aggressive, and uncontrollable when under the influence. Yet each time, his attorney managed to convince the judges that Reynolds posed no significant threat and should continue to have the freedom to walk the streets. A new arrest, trial, and an unexpectedly lenient sentence. Despite his lawyer's best efforts, Reynolds was arrested again in 2013. This time, he was caught while under the influence of controlled substances attempting to break into a stranger's home. He rambled incoherently, alternating between asking for help, making threats, and falsely identifying himself as a police officer, demanding the occupants open the door immediately. This incident was severe enough that his bail privileges were revoked, and he was held in custody until trial. Under Tennessee law, the collection of charges Reynolds faced could have led to the death penalty, and for once, it seemed he might finally be held accountable. But in mid-September 2014, just a week before the trial was set to begin, Reynolds shocked everyone by agreeing to a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, evidence tampering, and endangering the welfare of his young daughter. The court took his cooperation and guilty plea into consideration, and the sentence handed down was unexpectedly lenient. Reynolds was given 25 years in prison, a significantly reduced term from the 60 years the prosecution had sought. Additionally, Reynolds' lawyer secured parole eligibility after just 15 years, contingent on good behavior. In court, The convicted man offered an apology to his daughter and Rachel's family, but his words felt hollow and insincere. Rachel's mother, Bethany, saw the court's ruling as a personal insult and a betrayal of her daughter's memory. Feeling the sting of a justice system that seemed to fail her, Bethany made multiple attempts to appeal the sentence in higher courts. She also gave several interviews, aiming to raise public awareness about what she believed was a miscarriage of justice. To this day, Reynolds' sentence remains unchanged. Rachel's daughter, Natalie, is now in the care of her maternal grandmother, Bethany. According to the terms of the estate, Natalie will inherit all of her late mother's assets once she reaches adulthood. If you have watched till here, please like and subscribe to our channel. The case of Paul Savage. Wales is often portrayed on TV as a scenic country filled with quiet, remote villages and stunning landscapes, including ancient castles, beautiful coastal views, and lush greenery. It's no wonder it's a popular destination for tourists. However, beneath its picturesque exterior, Wales is also the site of some of the UK's most chilling unsolved murders, including the case of Paul Savage. On February 4, 2003, Paul Savage, a Royal Mail worker in the town of Mold, started his day like any other. He rode his bike through the chilly morning to continue his postal route along Clayton Road at around 7:15 a.m. After parking his bike against the wall, Paul was suddenly and violently attacked. Moments later, he was discovered unconscious at the bottom of a driveway by a resident on their way to work. The attack had occurred quickly and without warning. No screams were heard, and there were no witnesses to the incident. Paul was rushed to Wrexham Mailer Hospital. Paul had been brutally attacked with a blunt instrument. His mother, June White, and wife, Charlotte, were notified about the assault, and the police began investigating the shocking and unprovoked attack. By 11 a.m., authorities were treating the case as a homicide. Paul passed away without regaining consciousness, leaving behind a 4-year-old daughter without a father. The police continued their search for answers. Neighbors reported seeing 2 young men wearing dark hoodies fleeing the scene around the time of the attack. However, no one was able to identify them, and they remain unknown to this day. The severity of the attack was evident. Paul had been beaten so viciously that his jaw was shattered, and the base of his skull was crushed. The makeshift weapon is believed to have been an 18-inch piece of wood fashioned from the banister of a staircase. Initially, authorities theorized that the father of one had been the victim of either a random attack or a robbery gone wrong. But that changed when they began looking into Paul's past. The 30-year-old was originally from Sale in Greater Manchester and had a criminal record dating back over a decade. He had been jailed just a few years prior in October 2001 for 9 months for possession of drugs with the intent to supply. Reportedly, Paul had over 8 pounds and 1 penny $0.000 worth of cannabis in his possession. After he was released from prison, he moved with his wife and child to North Wales, where they settled in the village of Jennifield. At first, Paul joined the Royal Mail as a casual employee, but he quickly picked up more hours and became a full-time worker. Upon learning about the 30-year-old's criminal history, the police speculated that perhaps the attack had been some kind of gangland hits or grudge attack. Shortly after the investigation started, the Welsh police were assisted by the Greater Manchester Police Intelligence Units, and a $100,000 award was offered for any information leading to Paul's killer. According to Wales Online, while the inquiry failed to procure the culprits or culprits, it exposed the criminal network through the area of Mold. And in November 2003, an undercover operation code named Lion resulted in a series of arrests of suspected traffickers. The operation's goal was to bring Paul's murder to justice, but none of those arrests were ever linked to that crime. In spring of that same year, just months following the horrific murder, 5 people were arrested and questioned about the incident, but all were released without charge following a lack of sufficient evidence. A few years later, in February 2005, the police announced that they knew the motive behind the attack, but they did not publicly disclose what it was. For years, Paul's case remained dormant, at least publicly. Very little progress appeared to be occurring, and hope for the postman's loved ones began to dwindle as they questioned whether or not they would ever see justice. In February 2017, the case was featured on BBC's Crime Watch Live program and included a reconstruction of events. Although this brought in some leads, none of them panned out. A year later, authorities revealed that they had never been closer to a conclusion during the investigation. They also announced that they would be reviewing forensic evidence, hoping advances in forensic science would lead them to a new clue. Paul's mother, June, continues to look for answers. She told the Someone Knows Who Murdered My Son, "I will never give up. I won't." June described her son as a cheerful, easygoing man who loved football and his job. After his death, she spent 5 years fighting ovarian cancer before finally being given the all-clear. Her husband, Lance, passed away in February 2007. June left Mold in February 2004 and now resides in England with her partner. Law enforcement believes that the key to solving this case lies within the local community. They mention that people may be too afraid to come forward and are hopeful that, with time, more individuals will feel comfortable sharing what they might have witnessed or heard. Paul's case remains unsolved. If anyone has information about his murder, they can contact Crime Stoppers at 080051. The case of Robert Leeming. Robert Leeming had a friendly-looking face and a restless energy about him. At first glance, he seemed harmless. But once you dig into the details from his interviews, it becomes clear he's far from innocent. Between May 2019, his live-in girlfriend and their young child disappeared. While investigators were digging for answers, Robert was out giving interviews. What they uncover next will make you question everything you thought you knew. The case was so chilling and brutal that people dubbed him Canada's Chris Watts. And by the end of this story, you'll see why. Let's rewind to February 2017 to dive deeper into this tale. That year, Jasmine Lovett and Robbie Sanderson welcomed their first child, a daughter named Aaliyah Sanderson. Back then, Jasmine and Robbie were young and not yet married. People who knew Jasmine described her as stunningly beautiful and in her early 20s. But behind the surface, things weren't as good as they appeared, something common in many relationships. After Aaliyah was born, the bond between Jasmine and Robbie began to unravel. According to several news reports, Robbie started coming home later and later, leaving Jasmine alone to care for their baby. Things only got worse when he began showing up high or drunk. Robbie's behavior quickly turned more aggressive and hostile. One day, when he came home, he escalated the situation by yelling at Jasmine for money. Feeling scared for her safety, she ran into the bathroom to call the police. By the time the officers arrived, Robbie had already left. And since Jasmine wasn't hurt, they told her there wasn't much they could do. It took 13 days for the order to be lifted after Jasmine and Robbie said they had worked things out, but Jasmine was able to get an emergency order against Robbie. They told the police that they didn't need the order anymore, but it's still not clear what exactly they said to each other at that time. We know for sure that Jasmine and Robbie broke up in the end, and Jasmine took care of Aaliyah. After they broke up, Jasmine and Robbie were able to get along pretty well. They worked on being good co-parents and did their best to keep their daughter's home peaceful even though they had problems in the past. Remember that this all happened in February 2018, and during her mental turmoil, Jasmine turned to her close family for comfort. News stories say that Jasmine was very close to her mom and sister. They got together for family dinners a lot, and she told them about everything going on in her life. Jasmine thought it was time to start putting herself out there again after months of heartbreak. She signed up for a few dating sites in the hopes of meeting someone new. She didn't have to wait long to meet Robert Leeming, a guy who seemed to meet her high standards. In the middle of her 20s, Jasmine was only a few years younger than Robert, who was 34 years old at the time. There wasn't a big age difference, but it was still clear. Robert was born in the UK, but had moved around a lot as a child because his father was in the service. Moving around a lot made it hard for him to make friends that would last, and this problem stayed with him into adulthood. Robert had a hard time making friends, but he found a way to connect with people online where he felt more at ease. He loved meeting new people and chatting in online groups without having to deal with the stress of meeting them in person. In fact, he met his first wife in one of these chat rooms. She was Canadian and was learning to become a teacher. Robert moved to Canada to be with her after they got married in February 2013. They had a kid together, but the marriage didn't last. And by February 2017, they were no longer together. Robert's ex-wife got full custody of their son, and Robert could only visit him under supervision. Robert stayed in Canada even though he and his ex-wife were no longer together because he had permanent residency from his job as a heavy goods truck mechanic. Like Jasmine, Robert used dating sites to meet new people after his marriage ended. He dated a few women before he met Jasmine. When they first met in September 2018, their relationship moved quickly. A month later, Jasmine and her young daughter, Alea, moved in with Robert. People looked at her funny when she took that big of a step with a child around. Most people would say that moving in together after only 1 month of dating is quick, but for them, it made sense at the time. In terms of money, it made sense. Sharing a house cut costs in half, which is something that many people can respect these days. When you live with a partner instead of a flatmate, you share the rent. But there's also someone to help with chores, food, and in Jasmine's case, childcare. Since Jasmine didn't have a job at the time, she counted on child support from her ex-boyfriend to raise Alea. They must have been glad when Robert stepped in to help with Alea, and he did. Robert was happy to help out, whether it was getting things cleaned up, cooking, or watching Alea while Jasmine ran chores. He seemed to be loving his new job very much. Alea knew he loved her because he treated her like his own child. That was the most important thing for Jasmine. Things looked great from the outside. This is what Jasmine's family also thought. She stayed close to her mother and sister, John Harvey, and the three of them often got together for dinner. Robert started coming to these events, and her family was happy to have him. He seemed nice, interested, and truly concerned about Jasmine and Alea. However, not everyone agreed with it. Though Genevieve was always looking out for her sister, she couldn't get rid of her unease. She didn't like how quickly things were moving in their relationship. And even though it was clear that Robert cared about Alea and Jasmine, Genevieve couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't quite right. Then there was April 14, 2019, a normal family dinner. Alea, Robert, and Jasmine joined the normal group, but something wasn't right this time. Genevieve couldn't help but notice that Jasmine and Robert seemed a little more distant and quiet than normal. It was barely there, but it was enough to make her think. Anyhow, the dinner was over without a hitch, and the sisters even agreed to get together again on April 19th, Good Friday. But when the day came, Jasmine didn't show up. She didn't call, text, or do anything else. This was so not like them at all. Jasmine always did what she said she would do, especially when it came to family. Every call and text that John Harvey didn't get was adding to her stress. She even tried to send Jasmine a message on Facebook. But her messages were not only ignored, they were marked as not arrived. Because she couldn't get rid of her worry, Genevieve drove over to Jasmine and Robert's house that night around 5 p.m. There had to be someone home because the basement light was on. She rang the bell. Nothing. The doorbell was rung, but nothing came. She knocked again, waited, and even tried to sneak a peek inside, but the house was strangely quiet. Genevieve left her sister because she couldn't reach her and hoped she was overthinking things. On April 21st, 2 days later, Jasmine's mom, Kim, chose to go to the house herself. Like Genevieve, she was met with quiet. She tried to knock and ring the doorbell, but it didn't work. Kim was getting ready to leave when she saw two strange pairs of trainers by the front door. One pair had just been cleaned and was still very wet when it was put carefully by the door. Her mother left a note on the front door of Jasmine and Robert's house, but she hadn't heard back. It was probably a message telling them to get in touch with either Jasmine or Robert so that they would finally answer. But days went by, and Jasmine still hadn't said anything. Concern in the family had hit a boiling point by April 23rd, for days after the note was left. There were a few times when Jasmine didn't show up for planned events. Today, she was meant to have dinner with her mom and sister. For many years, this dinner had been a tradition for the family, and Jasmine would never miss it. The family held on to a thin thread of hope even though they were becoming more and more worried. Maybe something had come up, or maybe there was a mistake. But that hope started to fade as the hours went by, and Jasmine still hadn't shown up. For Genevieve, this was the moment when everything changed. She was really scared. Whatever it was, she couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her gut that told her something was very wrong. She was determined to do everything she could to find her sister, so she went to the police office and filled out a missing persons report. She gave the cops her phone, answered all of their questions, and told them everything she knew about Jasmine's life in the past few months. At first, police thought it was possible that Jasmine had left on her own, but John Harvey quickly brushed off the idea. She would never leave her family, especially not without first calling someone, and she would never leave her young daughter, Aaliyah, behind. Jasmine loved her child and her family very much. It was just not in her nature to disappear without a trace. Investigators also looked at Robbie, Jasmine's ex-boyfriend, to see if he had anything to do with her missing. Genevieve made it clear that Robbie was no longer in Jasmine's life, but he had given Aaliyah parenting rights, which meant he was no longer required to pay child support. Even though this made Jasmine's finances worse, there were no signs that they were still at odds with each other. He wasn't a suspect after cops looked into it more. Once the detectives looked more closely into Jasmine's connection with her current boyfriend, Robert, they found something much more complicated than they had first thought. And so, in December 2018, Jasmine told her sister Genevieve about the problems she was having with Robert. They were having a hard time with each other and had even split up. That being said, they chose to keep living together as roommates, even though it was an odd arrangement. Especially since there was a toddler in the house, Jasmine said it was a sensible choice. Not only is moving out with a child hard, it costs a lot of money. She said it was only a short-term fix while they tried to work things out. Following a short time, Jasmine told Genevieve that they were back together and ready to try again with their relationship. But that wasn't the end of the trouble. Another personal information that Jasmine shared with her sister made the situation even more complicated. Although they were apart at the time, she became pregnant. Instead of continuing the pregnancy, Jasmine made the hard choice to end it. It was still hard to understand whether that choice had anything to do with the split, their reconciliation, or something deeper that was hurting their relationship. As time went on, stress about money started to rise. Given that Robbie was no longer paying Aaliyah child support, Jasmine had to take care of herself and her daughter on her own. Despite not having found a job yet, Jasmine was determined to work. It wasn't just about earning money, she wanted to feel productive and connect with other adults. She even admitted feeling jealous every day when Robbie went to work while she stayed home caring for Aaliyah. This insight from Genevieve made the police certain this wasn't just a simple missing child case. The authorities quickly launched a full investigation, knowing Jasmine had been through a lot. Within days, they pieced together a timeline of events leading up to her disappearance. As mentioned, Jasmine and Aaliyah were last seen at a family dinner on April 14th, where everything appeared normal. Then, on April 15th, security footage captured them at a nearby store, with Jasmine peeing at a self-checkout, while Aaliyah sat quietly in her stroller. She looked cool and collected. The first signs of something being wrong started to show up the next day, April 16th. The exact time Robert dropped Aaliyah off at Christ was 7:12 in the morning. Things seemed to be going as planned. But at 4:46 p.m., something strange happened. Robert went back to get Aaliyah, but there was a problem. His name wasn't on the list of people who were allowed to pick her up. It wasn't a small thing. Robert had to call Jasmine to get permission from the Crush staff to take Aaliyah home. Jasmine then had to do this in person. This was definitely strange, but it wasn't the most scary thing. After that, Jasmine and Aaliyah were never seen or heard from again. Also, I post new cases and true crime stories here every week. If that sounds interesting to you, please think about subscribing. It really does help. Days went by with no sign of them. Then on April 18th, a clue showed up. It was discovered that someone else had used Jasmine's credit card to place an order for food delivery, but the police were not sure if it had been Jasmine herself who did it. But it was clear that the person who used it still had something to do with her. The research had now turned its attention to Robert. He was the last person seen with both Jasmine and Aaliyah after all. John Harvey, Jasmine's sister, had already told the police about the problems in her relationship with Robert, including how they broke up and then got back together and how stressed they were. With this new knowledge, Robert became an even more interesting person. It made sense to ask him, especially since their relation has been going through a lot of trouble lately. So on April 24th, the cops went to Robert's house to make sure he was okay. The next thing that happened was strange and scary. When the police knocked on the door, no one answered. They kept knocking. It was like playing Groundhog Day over and over again. Knocks, but no answer. After that, the police saw something odd. Some days ago, Jasmine's mom had left a note on the door. It was still there. It was almost like it was ready for them the whole time. But that wasn't the only strange thing about it. Before, the window in front of the front door was clear. Now, something that looked like cellophane, the clear plastic used to wrap gifts, was covering it. It was the only window on the door that was closed, and it made it impossible to see inside. It was impossible to see what was going on inside because of this. The police knocked on the door several times, rang the bell, and then waited. Something was being kept secret as the mood was tense. While they were waiting, one cop saw a wet trunk liner lying on top of the air conditioner, which looked like it was drying out. The trunk lining looked like it had just been cleaned. Also, the yard hose was unwound, which meant it had been used to clean something, most likely the trunk liner. This made me think right away of the trainers that Jasmine's mom had seen earlier that had been washed and soaked. It looked like there was going to be a cleanup, but what was being kept secret? As they kept looking, they realized something. Someone had been cleaning and moving things around in this house, so it wasn't empty. The only issue was that the cops couldn't get in to check on the people inside. They couldn't get in because the door was locked and the windows were closed. The police didn't want to give up though. They thought of a better idea and called the fire department. With the help of a ladder truck, they were able to look through the windows on the upper floors in the hopes of seeing something that would help them learn more. They were sorry, but they couldn't see anything through the windows. But as soon as the fire truck pulled up, the lights inside the house flickered on. Robert then opened the front door. The police knew they had to look into this further at this point. When they asked Robert about Jasmine's car, he said she didn't drive. That didn't make sense since she was an adult and should have a way to get around. They also saw the note that Jasmine's mother had left on the door, but Robert said he didn't know about it. Every second that went by, things were getting stranger. The police were becoming more and more suspicious of Robert's actions. He was responding in strange ways, and his story didn't seem to make sense. As they pressed him for more information, it seemed like Robert was either hiding something important or wasn't living in the real world at all. The police wanted to find out what was going on, so they chose to look into Robert's past more. It turned out that Robert had a history of mental and a past relationship. His ex-wife said that he would try to trick her, call her crazy, and hurt her feelings. It looked like Robert's lack of care and emotional were big reasons why they split up. It didn't end there though. Robert's ex-wife also said that he was getting more and more guns and knives, which scared her so much that she worried about her safety and the safety of their child. The police looked into Robert's past even more and found that his ex-girlfriend had also reported him for mistreating animals. It seems that Robert took the dog they used to have together to a park, tied it to a tree, and left it there without food or water. Luckily, someone saw the dog in the park and took it to the Humane Society. This was a very big red flag. If someone is mean to animals, they are likely to be mean to people too, and Robert's behavior towards animals caused a lot of worry. He was charged with animal abuse and pleaded guilty to 3 counts, making an animal in pain, failing to give an animal food and water, and failing to give an animal a place to stay. He didn't go to jail, but he did get a $5,000 fine and was told he couldn't have any animals for 10 years. There's more bad stuff in Robert's past though. During the divorce proceedings, Robert's ex-wife found out some very troubling things. On Robert's phone, she found some scary web searches. One was about tying a dog up in a tree, which, knowing his past, should have set off alarm bells. The next search was even worse. It was about a house fire that killed a mother and her kid. Just think about how scared his ex must have been after what he did to the dog. She was afraid he would do something much worse to her and her son. Because disturbing details about his past had come to light, the police decided to take the case very seriously. On April 25th, Robert was apprehended in connection with Jasmine and Aaliyah's disappearance and brought into a quiet room for questioning. He claimed the last time he saw them was on April 17th, when they took a walk at Bragg Creek, about 30 minutes from his home. After that, everyone supposedly returned to the house. Robert said that while he was getting ready for a date, Jasmine was watching TV on the couch. At this point, Robert was telling people that he and Jasmine were merely roommates and even mentioned he had been seeing someone else for a while. He insisted that everything seemed fine with Jasmine before he left for his date. However, when he returned that night, both Jasmine and Aaliyah were gone. This raised serious concerns for the police, especially after Jasmine's family revealed that Robert and Jasmine had actually gotten back together following their earlier breakup. To get in touch with the woman Robert said he was seeing that night, the police chose to call her Kate. Kate said she had been with Robert on the night Jasmine and Aaliyah went missing when they talked to her. The cops asked Kate some more questions to find out more. She said that she and Robert met online in February 2019, which was about 5 months after Jasmine and Aaliyah moved in with him. They had gone on a few dates together, and Robert would sometimes stay at Kate's house. Even though it didn't look like he was trying to hide the connection, here's the catch. Kate told the cops that she had never been to Robert's house. Every time she asked him why, he said it was because his room was messy and he shared it with someone else. He even called Jasmine his tenant instead of his lover. Even though everything was very strange, the cops couldn't just assume the worst. They thought he might have something to do with Jasmine and Aaliyah's disappearance, but they didn't have enough evidence to connect him directly to it. Robert was released, but only after he agreed to a few terms. They took away his car and phone and got a warrant to search his home, so they could look into it. He couldn't go home until they were done. The cops looked through everything over the next few days. When they checked Robert's phone, they saw that he had removed about 30 pictures of Jasmine and Aaliyah on April 23rd, the day they were reported missing. He had also deleted some pictures of a gun. To make things even worse, his phone's location data showed that he was near Bragg Creek when Jasmine and Aaliyah disappeared. Remember that he said they went there for a lunch, but the time seemed very off. The cops thought it was important to check out this creek area. They looked around and found a homemade fire pit that looked like it had just been used, but not for making hot dogs or es mores. They found some really scary things when they looked around: a car seatbelt, baby shoes, nappies, pieces of children's books, and a Jungle Book DVD. Scent dogs were brought in, and they sniffed out an accelerant that was used to start the fire. That was not the end of the probe. At a nearby petrol station, CCTV video caught Robert filling up his car and a petrol can. He then washed his car. What they found in his house, though, was even stranger. 2 long sticks had been put up to block the front door. And as we already said, cellophane was covering the window. A number of spots on the walls had also been cleaned and sanded down. They found more strange things inside, like a plastic hammer full of sand and boxes of blue moving blankets. They also found a gun, safe full of guns and ammunition boxes. But what stood out the most was a gun part that was partly melted, an infant toy, Jasmine's prescription bottles, and even her torn passport in his trash can. Not only that, but there was something even stranger. They found raw bacon strips all over the house, thrown around like they were on some strange flower trail. 3 pieces of raw bacon were found, one on a dining room chair, one in the garage, and one in the room with the iron. Even stranger, there was an empty bacon package just sitting there in the kitchen. Even though strange things were found, Jasmine and Aaliyah were still nowhere to be found. Even though all of this was going on, Robert was out there giving interviews and vehemently denying that he had anything to do with their disappearance. Robert looked like he was high or maybe drunk. He said that was how he had been living for a few days. He said everyone thought he was a thief or killer, which is why he lost his job. His friends turned against him, and he had nothing to do but drink every day. He was also very angry with the cops and said they had ruined his house and made a huge mess. Robert was sure he was not guilty and hired a lawyer because he thought he would need help to prove it. But then a close friend of his came forward secretly and said that Robert was known for acting crazy and being a loose cannon. Investigators believed this new information because it fit with other strange things they had seen him do. Another piece of the puzzle that made him look more and more suspicious. The cops still didn't have enough proof to press charges, so they chose to try something different. 2 fake police officers came up to Robert on the street near his house on May 5th. You may remember that Robert had been complaining a lot about how bad things were in his life. He said he had lost his job, his friends, and no one to turn to. This looked like exactly what the cops wanted because Robert started to talk to them, which made it clear what they wanted. The fake cops kept telling him they thought he was innocent, which made him feel good about himself. Robert seemed to feel better after hearing this, and he was more open to talking to them. During their talk, the police officers even told Robert a lie at one point. Someone in his neighborhood had taken evidence from the scene of the crime and given it to them while the police were looking into his house, they said. They told Robert this lie in the hopes that he would trust them more. He kept giving them the runaround by suggesting that they meet up for a beer so that they could talk about destroying the proof together. Robert agreed to meet them even though he was clearly lonely and scared, but he was still a little wary of the police even though he seemed to be opening up. He repeatedly questioned whether they were really police officers or if they were trying to trick him. The undercover agents reassured him, convincing him they weren't cops. To maintain their cover, the officers spun wild tales about being part of a criminal gang with a dark past. They painted the police as the real villains and promised they could help Robert. They even eased his fears by explaining how to avoid raising suspicion from the real police. Eventually, the officers invited Robert to their warehouse, a fabricated location designed to sound like a secret stash of illegal weapons. For Robert, having someone to confide in was crucial, and he was willing to accept any help. When they arrived at the warehouse, the officers showed him a collection of guns to reinforce the idea that these people were dangerous criminals. Robert appeared affected by the sight of the weapons. After hearing all of these convincing stories, he began to trust them more and started opening up. He told them that he cheated on Jasmine while they were dating. He said that was okay because that's what all guys do. This isn't always true, but it helped the police learn more about his personality and way of thinking. Robert says that Jasmine wanted to get married, but he didn't, which made things very tense between them. Robert became even more open as the talk went on. Even though he had only met these two cops 5 hours before, he told them everything, almost as if he was looking for approval or sympathy. He didn't give a clear answer about how he killed Jasmine and her daughter, Aaliyah, but he did say some troubling things. After killing them, Robert used his phone to look for a place out of the way to dump their bodies. He picked Bragg Creek and drove there to see what was around. The next day, he said he hid the bodies by taking them to the woods near Bragg Creek. He buried them and covered them in petrol once he got there. He didn't actually burn their bodies, but he thought that the smell of petrol would throw off the corpse dogs and keep them from finding the bodies. That wasn't the last thing Robert did to hide his tracks. He also told the police that he had made a homemade fire pit to burn Jasmine and Aaliyah's things to make it look like Jasmine had just taken her child and run away. Things like Aaliyah's car seat and other things were set on fire. Robert went so far as to cover the bodies in mulch because he thought it would help hide the smell and make the corpse dogs even more confused. The police were most shocked by Robert's fixation on scaring the corpse dogs away. He didn't just have bacon all over his house because he liked the way it smelled. As Robert explained, he had heard that pork smells like human meat, so he thought that the bacon would keep the dogs from smelling the bodies. His plan looked like it was well thought out. It was almost like he had studied how to stay hidden. He even talked about his old car and joked that the cops would have been able to easily track him down if it had been a newer model. Since it wasn't, he felt like he was getting away with something. Even better, Robert agreed to show the police where he had hid the bodies. They drove to Bragg Creek in the middle of the night, and Robert showed them exactly where he had buried Jasmine and Aaliyah. The bodies were buried near the homemade fire pit with dirt, sticks, and mulch on top of them. They were wrapped in blue moving blankets. Robert's decision to call the police was scary because it showed how proud he was of what he had done. Killers often go back to the places they've broken things or keep things that remind them of what they did. Robert seemed to enjoy showing off what he had done. The cops were able to arrest Robert right away with the information he gave them. Not long after, the Calgary Police Department held a press meeting, but they didn't give all the information out right away. A DNA test proved the worst. The bodies that were found belonged to Jasmine and her young daughter, Aaliyah. Jasmine had a terrible blow to the head and a bullet wound behind her left ear, which made this situation even worse. Aaliyah also took very hard hits, one on each side of her head, one to her back, and a spinal injury that ruled out the fall idea. Both deaths were ruled murders, which means that the police can now charge people with murder instead of just manslaughter. The May 7th was a bad day for Robert because he was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. The prosecution thought about charging the person with first-degree murder for a short time, but decided they couldn't show premeditation. They were sure that second-degree murder would be their main focus, and they wanted a strong conviction. In October 2021, Robert's hearing began, and his defense took an unexpected turn. It was almost cruel of him to say that he had nothing to do with Aaliyah's death even though he admitted to killing Jasmine. Robert's defense team painted a very scary picture of what they said took place on April 17th. While Robert picked up Aaliyah from nursery, they said that the house was empty when he got there. There was no sign of Jasmine. He and Aaliyah watched The Wiggles together, which was her favorite show. She got lost and went upstairs to the kitchen at some point. Sadly, she slipped and fell backward, hitting her head. Robert said she woke up quickly and looked fine, so they kept spending the night eating food and watching TV. Then Robert put Aaliyah to bed, smoked a cigarette outside, and got a drink for himself. She got home around 7 and went upstairs around 9 to check on Aaliyah. She found her daughter not breathing or moving in her bed, which is every mother's worst fear. Robert says that Jasmine got very angry right away and accused him of killing Aaliyah, but that charge made Robert angry. He said that when he was mad, he grabbed a hammer and hit Jasmine over and over with it until she fell down. He then got a gun and shot her to make sure she was really dead. From there, the story got worse. In a desperate move to hide his tracks, Robert wrapped Jasmine's dead body in a blue moving blanket and then cleaned up the blood with a towel. He threw the towels away, got another drink, and then went to bed. He hid their bodies and burned anything that could have linked him to the crime over the next few days, but the autopsy showed a much worse story. Aaliyah's head and spinal cord were hurt much worse than a fall could have caused. It was too clear that this wasn't an accident. Also, the medical experts said Aaliyah had injuries to her genital area, which suggests that she may have been hurt there. Because of this new information, investigators think that when Jasmine got home on April 17th, she caught Robert in the act. Robert is said to have killed Jasmine to keep her from telling anyone what she had found. He then killed Aaliyah out of fear and made up a story about her falling down the stairs by accident to hide his tracks. This idea fit with what Jasmine's family had said about Robert's behavior, that he picked up Aaliyah, cooked for her, and spent a lot of time with her in a way that made people suspicious. Many people would say that a good step-parent can show care for a child, but Robert's over-the-top interest in the child, especially after hearing what the medical examiner found, seemed like more than just normal love. The most interesting thing is that Robert never denied killing Aaliyah when he was talking to fake police. He made it look like an accident instead. Prosecutors said that Robert would have been eager to make it clear if Aaliyah's death had been truly accidental, especially since killing a kid is such a horrible thought. The defense said that Robert never said he didn't kill her in court. He stuck to the story he had started with instead. Robert was the only witness for his defense, and he told the same story. Aaliyah had fallen down the stairs, hit her head, and had died in her sleep. The part where he said he couldn't call for help because he couldn't find his phone didn't hold water though. Robert really did have his phone with him the whole time. Plus, the police were able to read his texts, including one he sent to his lover right before the killings. Even though there were problems, Robert gave up his right to a jury hearing and let the judge decide what would happen to him. Robert was found guilty of second-degree murder in Aaliyah's death because the injuries were not an accident and would have happened anyway. The judge also said Robert's acts, like drinking and smoking after the killings instead of getting help for Aaliyah, showed he didn't feel bad about what he did. Robert received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 22 years. While Jasmine's family was relieved by the verdict, they knew that no amount of time could bring Jasmine and Aaliyah back. They found some solace knowing their loved ones' terrible efforts would live on. They donated $2.25 to the Calgary Women's Emergency Shelter and established a memorial scholarship in Jasmine's name to support other women facing hardship. In 2022, Robert appealed his sentence, arguing that the medical examiner couldn't definitively rule out that Aaliyah's injuries were accidental. However, the appeal was denied. Then, on July 23, 2024, he was convicted once again. Jasmine and Aaliyah's families continued to honor their memory by advocating against domestic violence and supporting survivors. Still, many felt that the sentence, only 22 years with parole eligibility, was far too lenient given the calculated and brutal nature of the crimes. Thank you so much for watching and exploring these cold cases with me. If you found the video interesting, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to NA Cold Cases for more deep dive into the unsolved and unexplained.